They said the storm would wipe out everything in its path, but deep in the forest, beneath a blanket of broken leaves, a tiny lion cub named Leo was still breathing, barely. His siblings wrapped around him, their bodies trembling in the cold, their cries barely more than whispers, miles away. A quiet boy named Tommy, still grieving the loss of his mother, began sketching a cub he had never seen. Was it just imagination? Or something more? What happened next would bring a family back together and give a broken child the courage to live again. Before we begin this unforgettable story, would you mind sharing where you're from in the comments? And if stories of love, loyalty, and second chances move you. Please give this video a like and consider subscribing. In the remote heart of Colorado's Blackwater Creek Nature Reserve, where the pine trees whispered stories no one heard and the wind carried the scent of snow, a hollow silence fell after the storm. The blizzard that swept through the mountains the night before had left the forest glassy and white, blanketing rocks and branches in a brittle frost. The morning sun filtered weakly through frozen boughs, casting fractured shadows onto the forest floor. Tucked inside a narrow crevice by the creek, little more than a natural rock shelter lined with dried leaves and fur, a litter of 3 lion cubs stirred, born in this hidden den just weeks ago. They had never known a world beyond this fold of stone and snow. But now the world had changed. Their mother was gone. The night had roared and howled. When the snow cleared, the den was colder, emptier. They had waited for her. A flick of a tail, a low purring breath. But she did not return. Of the 3 cubs, 2 were slightly larger. They shared a deeper golden hue in their fur and bore faint traces of strength budding in their limbs. The third, the smallest, lay curled against the frozen ground, his coat paler, his frame frail and thin. His name, if names were ever spoken in such a wild place, would be Leo. Leo hadn't moved in hours. The stronger of the 2 siblings nudged him gently, their noses brushing his trembling side. The other positioned herself beside him, trying to offer what warmth remained in her body. Their breaths fogged in the chill, shallow and uncertain. Then, from the mouth of the den, came a soft, desperate sound, a mewl, not yet a roar, a whimper wrapped in instinct. It repeated, louder the second time, as if calling not for their mother now, but for the world itself to notice. There was no answer, just the sound of wind weaving through pine branches, and the faint drip of melting snow into the creek below. But elsewhere, in a small town curled along the edge of the valley, someone was listening, not with their ears, but with their dreams. In a modest gray house on the outskirts of Harrow's Point, 11-year-old Tommy Madsen sat upright in bed, heart racing. The bedroom was quiet, but his chest rose and fell as though he'd been running. The sketch pad on his nightstand was already in his lap, and his hand, without instruction, moved swiftly with pencil and grip. His eyes were glassy, distant. He was drawing again, the paper filled with the soft curve of a lion cub's body, limp and hollow, cradled between 2 shadows. He didn't question what he was seeing. He hadn't questioned it the night before, or the night before that. The dream had returned. The same den, the same cub, the same unbearable stillness. Tommy didn't understand where the image came from, only that it was real in the way grief was real, and loss, and that cold echo he'd felt in his chest since the day his mother died. Tommy was slender, pale-skinned, with soft brown hair that curled at the edges. Since his mother's passing, he'd spoken less and drawn more, retreating into paper and graphite like they were the only safe places left. His father worked long shifts, and his grandparents checked in, but no one could reach the place where Tommy kept his feelings locked away. Except, maybe, this cub. He didn't know why it mattered, but it did. He finished the sketch with a final stroke, adding one faint line above the cub's eyes, a crease of worry, of pain. Then he set the pencil down and whispered to the empty room, "I see you." The morning sky was colorless, washed in a dull silver that made the pine trees of Harrow's Point stand still like a photograph. Frost still clung to the windowsills of the Madsen house, the kind that stayed even after the sun had risen. Inside, the warmth from the wood-burning stove did little to reach the edges of the old home, but the small kitchen was full of quiet activity. Tommy sat at the table, sketchpad resting in his lap. His fingers twitched over the page, lines half-formed. He had drawn Leo again, this time closer, clearer. The cub's head was tucked under the paw of another lion, eyes barely open, mouth slightly parted as if he were trying to call out. The shadows of his two siblings loomed over him like protective shields. Across the table, his grandfather Walter sipped from a ceramic mug that had a faded moose painted on it. Walter Madsen. Now, 66, still carried the strength of a man, used to moving through rough terrain. His shoulders were broad, and his hands were scarred from decades of ranger work. He kept his hair short and his beard trimmed, though patches of white betrayed his age. Walter had always been a man of quiet order, dependable but private, shaped by years of watching life and death in the forest. Tommy looked up, his voice low. "Grandpa, I saw them again last night." Walter didn't respond at first. He simply looked at the boy, then down at the drawing. "The same cub?" he asked. Tommy nodded. "He's not doing well. He's not moving." Walter exhaled slowly. "Dreams can feel real sometimes, Tommy, especially when we're going through hard things." "But this isn't just a dream," Tommy said. His tone was firmer now, his eyes more focused than Walter had seen in months. "I hear him, and I think he's still alive." Walter glanced out the window, toward the trailhead that led into the reserve. The thought lingered. He had seen strange things in those woods over the years, things no one had ever been able to explain. And maybe, just maybe, this wasn't about belief. Maybe it was about trust. He set down his mug. "Well," he said gruffly, "we're not going to find out by sitting here." Tommy's eyes widened. "You believe me? I believe you believe it," Walter said, reaching for his jacket. "That's good enough for me." A half hour later, they stepped out into the cold. Tommy bundled in a red parka and green wool scarf, a hand-drawn map tucked in his coat pocket. Walter wore his old ranger coat, still patched from when a bear once clawed through it near the lake trail. At his side trotted Maggie, a 9-year-old golden retriever with a gentle gait and soft amber eyes. Maggie had been Walter's companion since her days as a rescue trainee. Though she was no longer fit for field duty, her nose was still sharp and her loyalty unshakable. She moved with a calm dignity, her thick coat catching flecks of frost as she led the way. They entered the forest just as the wind shifted. The trees whispered above them, and the ground beneath their boots crunched with half-frozen leaves and broken pine cones. Tommy walked quietly, his heart pounding, unsure if he was chasing a dream or walking into one. About 20 minutes in, Maggie stopped. Her ears perked. She sniffed the air, then veered sharply left, away from the trail. Tommy followed without question, ducking under low branches as Maggie picked her way through the undergrowth. Walter kept pace behind them, his boots sure on the uneven terrain. Then they heard it, a sound so faint it could have been the wind, except that it trembled. It was not a cry exactly, but a soft rasp, like breath passing through a tired throat. Maggie turned her head sharply and broke into a cautious trot. They crested a small ridge and came upon a narrow ravine, shielded by fallen logs and thick bramble. And there, nestled in the shadows beneath a broken pine, was the den. Tommy gasped. 2 lion cubs, bigger than he expected, but still clearly young, were curled tightly around a third. The smallest one lay limp, head resting on a bed of brittle leaves, chest rising with barely there breaths. It was Leo. He was real. Tommy dropped to his knees a few feet away, his breath caught between fear and awe. The older cubs lifted their heads, ears flattening. One of them hissed, a sound that was more warning than threat. But Tommy didn't move closer. He simply sat, cross-legged, watching. After a moment, he reached into his coat and pulled out the drawing, slowly. He laid it on the ground in front of him, letting it catch the breeze. Walter stepped beside him, wide-eyed. I'll be damned. Even in his years as a ranger, he'd never seen lion cubs this young in the wilds of Colorado, not without a mother nearby, not like this. Walter crouched beside Tommy, assessing the scene like a professional. "We'll need to call the rescue team," he said, his voice low. "They'll know what to do." Tommy nodded. He looked at Leo, at his half-closed eyes, his ribs showing beneath thin skin. There was a desperation in his stillness, as if he'd waited long enough. Walter pulled out his satellite radio and stepped away to contact the emergency wildlife unit. Meanwhile, Maggie lay down beside Tommy, her calm presence steadying the boy's trembling hands. Minutes passed. Then, as if sensing something had shifted, the older cub that had been guarding Leo relaxed slightly. It looked at Tommy, blinked, then laid its head back down beside its brother. For now, there was peace, fragile but real. The rescue team arrived just before dusk. Their truck was a dull white with green striping, bearing the emblem of the Rocky Mountain Wildlife Emergency Response Unit. Snow had begun to fall again, in soft, slow flakes as the forest dimmed into twilight. Walter stood beside the den entrance with Maggie at his feet, while Tommy remained crouched silently a few feet away, watching over Leo and his siblings. The lead rescuer was Jenna Park, a calm woman in her late 30s with short, raven black hair and warm olive skin. She was compact in frame, no more than 5'4", but moved with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent her life around animals larger and stronger than herself. Her brown eyes missed nothing. Jenna had worked wildlife response for 12 years, and though she'd seen many rescues, something in Tommy's story struck her as different. "This the cub from your drawing?" she asked softly, kneeling beside him. Tommy nodded, not taking his eyes off Leo. "All right, let's bring them in carefully," she said, glancing at Walter. "We'll take the smallest one first." Leo was wrapped gently in a heated thermal blanket, his weight no more than a medium-sized dog, but far weaker. The older cubs were coaxed into secure travel crates with calm, quiet movements. Tommy didn't leave Leo's side. Even when the cub was gently lifted onto the stretcher, Walter put a hand on his grandson's shoulder. "He's safe now. Let's ride with him." The drive to the shelter was quiet. Jenna sat in the front, handling the wheel with steady precision. Behind her, Tommy kept a hand on the edge of Leo's carrier, watching the rise and fall of the cub's chest. Every so often, Leo's tail would twitch faintly, as if dreaming. The shelter itself was a modest facility nestled near the edge of the reserve, Blackwater Wildlife Rehab Center, a low wooden structure with a long main hall and a series of climate-controlled rooms in the back. Though no longer officially staffed full-time, Walter retained access as a retired supervisor and volunteer, often visiting to help with injured elk or the occasional mountain cat. They brought Leo into room 3A, a smaller space with soft straw flooring, radiant heat panels, and a quiet humming from the vent system above. Jenna checked vitals while Walter filled out the intake log. Tommy stood near the door, unsure of what to do next. Jenna's assistant, Luis Navarro, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 20s with chestnut skin and a crooked nose that had clearly been broken once, appeared with a tray of diluted formula and medicine. He moved efficiently, but with kindness, whispering in Spanish under his breath as he prepared the syringe. "He won't eat," Jenna said after a few minutes. "Refuses formula. Won't take liquid through the dropper either. He's stressed." Walter crossed his arms. Not surprising. He's been cold, hungry, and alone. Tommy finally stepped forward. "Can I sit with him?" The room went quiet. Jenna studied him a moment, then gave a small nod. "If you're calm and quiet." Tommy walked over and sat cross-legged on the floor, about 2 feet from Leo's side. The cub opened one eye briefly, then closed it again. Tommy reached slowly into his backpack and pulled out his sketchbook. He flipped to a fresh page and began to draw. Day after day passed. The storm outside gave way to sunshine, then rain. And Tommy came back every morning. He didn't touch Leo. He didn't talk to him like people might. He just sat and drew. Sometimes he read from an old copy of Where the Red Fern Grows, or whispered bits of poems his mom used to read to him. He didn't expect anything in return, and for the first few days, Leo gave him nothing. But on the 5th morning, something changed. Tommy sat in his usual spot, pencil in hand, when Leo stirred. The cub didn't cry or stand, but he turned his head toward Tommy and rested his muzzle on the straw, eyes blinking slowly. Tommy froze, then smiled. "You saw me, didn't you?" Leo exhaled, a low, soft sound, not fear, not pain, something else. That night, for the first time in months. Tommy slept through until dawn. By the end of the first week, Leo had taken his first proper meal, a slurry of warm goat's milk and crushed nutrients. Jenna noted it quietly on her chart, her mouth lifting just slightly at the corners. Walter watched from the hallway, arms folded, and murmured to her, "You ever seen something like that? A kid bonding with a lion like that?" Jenna shook her head. They both needed something only the other could give. Luis added with a smirk, "It's like therapy, but fuzzier." Tommy now read aloud from his books every morning. He'd also started a new drawing series, this time of Leo not as the fragile cub from his dreams, but as something stronger, proud, majestic. He even added wings in one, like a guardian spirit. Leo grew more responsive with each day. He blinked when Tommy walked in. He shifted closer during stories, and though he still bore the wear of starvation, his eyes were clearer, his breath steadier. Outside, spring began to press against the frost. Snow melted into soil, buds crept onto the branches, and within the wooden walls of Blackwater's quiet rehab center, two survivors, one with fur and one with memory, found something wordless but real. The days slipped by like slow-moving clouds, and with each sunrise, Leo grew stronger. His steps were still wobbly, but his appetite returned, his eyes sharpened, and his tail flicked with cautious energy. His siblings, housed in the enclosure next door, responded just as well. Though they were not as bonded with the humans, they too had learned to trust the steady rhythm of care. Tommy, now a fixture at the shelter, had become part of the routine. Every morning after school, he'd arrive with new sketches, new stories, and quiet words only Leo seemed to hear. One Saturday morning, the wind picked up, rustling the leaves that had only just begun to reappear on the trees. Spring was arriving, and so was change. Walter stood outside the shelter, his old ranger hat pulled low against the light breeze. He held a field tablet in one hand, brows furrowed. Tommy approached, scarf trailing behind him. "Is something wrong?" Walter looked down at the boy, his expression unreadable. "We might have a lead." He turned the screen toward Tommy. On it was a photograph taken by a motion-triggered wildlife camera, a grainy image captured just after dawn. In it, a large lioness stood near the rocky cliffs south of Blackwater Creek. Her left shoulder was lowered unnaturally, her body thin, ribs visible even in the blur of the photo, but her eyes were unmistakable, watchful, weary, and searching. Tommy's heart skipped. "That's her." "Isn't it? That's Leo's mom?" Walter nodded. "Looks like she's injured, possibly trapped. That rock face there." He pointed to the background of the image. "Is near Red Elk Canyon. It's not far, but the terrain is rough." Just then, Jenna Park arrived, her short black hair wine-tousled, and her usual calmness tinged with urgency. "Luis is loading the gear," she said. "We're going to need ropes if she's stuck in that ravine. It's going to be a two-person descent at least." Walter handed her the coordinates. "We leave in 20. Tommy's eyes darted between them. "Can I come?" Jenna hesitated, but Walter didn't. "Only to the ridge, no further." "Understood." Tommy nodded quickly, already reaching for his pack. Red Elk Canyon was named for the way the cliffs bled red at sunset. It was a deep gorge carved by centuries of snowmelt, flanked by jagged boulders and moss-slicked walls. The team arrived by truck and hiked the final stretch, ropes and first aid kits strapped to their backs. Luis carried the tranquilizer gear. Jenna brought a field scanner and satellite tag. Tommy, walking beside Walter, held his sketchbook tightly under his arm. When they reached the lookout, it didn't take long to find her. The lioness lay wedged halfway down a rock cleft, one of her hind legs trapped beneath a fallen slab. Her breathing was rapid, shallow. She growled softly when the wind carried their scent to her. But it wasn't a sound of aggression. It was pain, fear. Jenna raised her binoculars. "We've got a dislocated hip. Maybe worse. If she struggles, she could do more damage." Walter scanned the cliff. "There's a narrow descent to the left. I'll go. Jenna, you anchor me. Luis, stand by with the shot. No dart unless necessary," Jenna cautioned. Walter nodded. She deserves to see a familiar face. Tommy watched in silence as his grandfather descended, ropes biting into the sandstone. When Walter reached the ledge, He moved slowly, hands raised. "You're all right." "Girl," he whispered. The lioness hissed low, her body trembling. But she didn't lunge. She didn't fight. Walter reached into his coat and pulled out a soft cloth, one that carried the scent of her cubs, rubbed gently each day in the shelter. He tossed it toward her gently. She sniffed it, then closed her eyes. That was all the permission he needed. Jenna and Luis worked quickly, with harnesses and wedges. They lifted the rock just enough. Walter slid a padded brace beneath her flank. Luis rappelled down with the stretcher, and together they lifted her, inch by inch, back to the surface. The moment they reached level ground, Jenna knelt and whispered, "Tranquilizer not needed. She trusts him." Back at the shelter. The reunion was silent at first. Tommy stood in the observation hallway, pressed against the glass, inside the recovery room. Leo sat near the door, staring at the new arrival with curious intensity. The lioness lay curled under a heat lamp, her bandaged legs stretched out, her breath deep but calm. Then Leo rose. He walked forward, slowly, carefully. His steps were uncertain but deliberate. The lioness lifted her head. Her eyes found him, and in that small room, filled with the hum of heating vents and the scent of antiseptic. A bond reforged. Leo pressed his head against her shoulder. The lioness let out a sound, half purr, half sob. Her paw moved, wrapping around her son. Tommy felt a lump rise in his throat. Walter stepped beside him, saying nothing. But Tommy didn't need words. He knew, in that moment, what trust looked like, and what it could return. The sun rose golden and slow over Blackwater Creek, bathing the tall pines in a warm, gentle light. Morning fog drifted lazily between trunks, curling around the weather-worn sign at the entrance of the expanded wildlife sanctuary. That morning, someone had added a small wooden plaque beneath it, newly carved. The letters etched with care and sealed with resin. Leo's Pines. Tommy Madsen stood beneath it, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, eyes wide with quiet pride. He didn't say much. He never did. But something about that sign stirred a stillness in him. Not the kind of stillness that comes with fear, like it used to. No. This was something softer, something earned, behind him. Walter gave a nod of approval. Fitting name. Don't you think Tommy looked up at his grandfather and smiled? Yeah, it is. The sanctuary had been expanded in the week since Leo's mother was rescued. Jenna Park had pushed hard with state officials to designate the ravine and its surrounding territory as part of Blackwater Creek's protected lands. It was now closed off to hikers and tourists, a haven just for the lions. Luis helped construct new perimeter fencing and a sheltered observation outpost, camouflaged under mossy timber and rock. The lioness had made a full recovery. Her leg would never be as strong, but she could walk, hunt, lead. The siblings, stronger now, lean and playful, followed her everywhere, and Leo. He'd grown into his name. His coat shimmered gold in the sun, and though he still had a gentle air, he moved with the confidence of something that had faced death and decided to live. Each time Tommy visited, Leo spotted him from across the enclosure and padded over quickly, head low and tail swaying, like a dog greeting his boy. They never touched, not physically, but they didn't need to. Their bond existed in glances, in silence, in memory. Today's visit was different. A small group had gathered near the edge of the sanctuary, members of the wildlife staff, donors, even a few reporters with cameras slung around their necks. Among them stood Elena Griggs, the regional conservation director for Colorado's Department of Wildlife. Elena was tall, elegant, and crisp in her forest green blazer. Her silver hair was pinned neatly in a twist, and her demeanor was sharp but sincere. She approached Tommy, kneeling slightly to meet his eyes. "Tommy Madsen," she said, offering a firm handshake. "You're braver than most adults I know." Tommy flushed, his voice small. "I just followed a dream?" Elena smiled. "Well, thanks to your dream and your actions, we're naming you Blackwater's first honorary wildlife companion." She handed him a small bronze pin shaped like a paw print. Tommy took it carefully, his fingers trembling, not with fear, but something close to wonder. From a distance, Leo let out a soft chuff, as if echoing his approval. That night, Harrow's Point Elementary held its annual spring showcase, a gathering where students shared poems, stories, art, and music. Walter sat in the second row, arms folded, heart steady but proud. Jenna and Luis had come, too. Seated near the back, Maggie, the golden retriever, sat quietly at Walter's feet, her muzzle beginning to gray but her eyes still warm. Tommy stood backstage, clutching a folded piece of paper. He wore a clean blue shirt and khaki pants that didn't quite reach his ankles. His palms were sweaty, his stomach twisted, but in his mind, he pictured Leo, small, broken, alone in that den, and the first time they had looked at each other. He wasn't afraid of eyes anymore. He had already survived silence. When the teacher called his name, Tommy stepped onto the stage. His footsteps echoed across the gymnasium floor. He unfolded the paper with careful fingers, took a deep breath, and began. "I want to tell you about someone I met who saved me," he said. The room went quiet. He didn't talk, he didn't need to. He just waited for someone to see him. Tommy's voice didn't shake. His words grew steadier with each line, describing the blizzard, the den, the moment he saw Leo in his dreams, how he'd drawn the same image again and again without knowing why, how his grandfather believed him, how they found the cub, how, in a room full of strangers, Leo had become his friend. "I thought I was the one helping him," Tommy said. "But the truth is, he helped me remember how to feel things again." The crowd was still when he finished. Then someone clapped, slow at first, then stronger. Soon, the whole room filled with applause. Walter's eyes glistened. Outside, the stars were bright over Harrow's Point. Walter walked beside Tommy, Maggie padding behind them. The boy was quiet but upright, shoulders no longer tucked into himself. "You did good," Walter said. Tommy glanced up. "Do you think he heard me?" Walter looked toward the dark line of trees in the distance, where Leo slept beneath the pines. "I think," he said, "he's known it all along. Sometimes, the smallest roar can echo through the darkest forest. And sometimes, it's not the strong who save the weak, but the broken who save each other." Leo was just a tiny lion cub waiting in silence, and Tommy was just a quiet boy carrying invisible scars. But in their meeting, something changed. Not just for them, but for everyone who watched their story unfold. Maybe it wasn't just chance that brought them together. Maybe it was something greater, something divine. Because when we open our hearts to listen, to truly see, we begin to hear the gentle whisper of God working in ways we don't always understand, through dreams, through courage, through quiet faith. If this story moved you, we invite you to share it with someone who might need a little hope today. Comment your thoughts below, and if you believe in second chances, in quiet miracles, and in the power of love, type Amen in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that remind us we're never alone, no matter how lost we feel. And may God bless you, wherever you are. As deeply as he blessed a boy and a lion in the forest named Leo,